Okay, shall we go ahead? Can I get a thumbs up? Perfect. Great, thank you, and welcome everybody. So I just want to welcome everyone to the launch of this Vancouver Principles working paper, which is really focused on the collaboration between peacekeeping missions and child protection actors for the prevention, release, and reintegration of CAAFAG. And the objective with children associated with armed forces and armed groups, I know the acronym is familiar to this group, but just in case. And really the objectives of this webinar are to share the findings of the research on the implementation of the Vancouver Principles, which was conducted in the Central African Republic, South Sudan, and the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and then also really raise awareness on the recommendations of the Vancouver Principles working paper to the relevant stakeholders, which include donors, the United Nations, and then national and international NGOs. Before we dive in, I have one housekeeping slide, which is really about interpretation, which is available. You will see the little globe button at the bottom of your screen. And so we have interpretation available in Spanish and in Arabic today. So just making sure that you're able to listen in your preferred language if you'd like. I think without any further ado, I am going to give you a little bit of a overview of the session and the flow of the session today. So we're going to have opening remarks from the director of the Alliance, Hani Mansourian. Then we'll have the presentation on the findings of the paper, and then we'll have a colleague from the Department of Peace Operations, Valentina Falco, who will share her reflections and have an intervention on the findings of the paper and her comments to it. And then we'll have a moment for question and answers, and I'll prompt you to that. It will be in the chat, so you're welcome to write them down, and then we'll read them out loud for the colleagues to respond to. And then we'll have closing remarks from Canada, who has generously supported this research. So this is it from me, and Hani, the director of the Alliance, I'm going to give you the floor now to take us forward and open this webinar today. Thank you. Over.
Great. Thanks, Katherine, and everyone who has worked hard to both make the paper possible, but also put together this launch. There are lots of people behind the scenes, so thanks to all of them. I also wanted to thank all of you for joining us for the launch of this working paper that, as Katherine mentioned, is on the collaboration between the peacekeeping operations and child protection actors for the prevention of recruitment, identification, release, and reintegration of children. This work was conducted with the leadership of Plan International and UNICEF as part of the CAAFAG task force of the Alliance for Child Protection and Humanitarian Action, with the generous support of Global Affairs Canada. Before anything else, I would like to recognize and thank the many individuals and organizations who contributed to this work. The paper draws on the experiences and expertise of colleagues working in the Central African Republic, DRC, and South Sudan, including community leaders, national and international NGOs, UNICEF colleagues, peacekeeping personnel, and children and young people themselves. We are deeply grateful for their insights, commitment, and willingness to share their experiences from these complex and at times challenging contexts. We are launching this paper at a critical moment for children affected by armed conflict and armed violence. Just last week, the annual report of the Secretary General on Children in Armed Conflict revealed a record number. Again, for many years in a row, we have had record numbers of grave violations against children, serving as a stark reminder that children continue to bear the brunt of conflict. Among these violations is, of course, the recruitment and use of children by armed forces and armed groups. At the same time, humanitarian actors are facing unprecedented funding pressures, making it more important than ever that we invest in prevention and strengthening our collective efforts to protect children before harm occurs. For many years, the Alliance has championed the importance of prevention. This is also why the Vancouver Principles are such a critical instrument. At their core, they represent a commitment to preventing the recruitment and use of children and strengthening collective action to protect children from some of the gravest violations they could face in their lifetimes. The implementation of the Vancouver Principles has also generated important lessons about collaboration. It has challenged us to work in closer partnerships with a diverse range of actors, communities, governments, security actors, peacekeeping missions, and other stakeholders who play an important role in the protection of children. In many cases, this means working beyond our traditional spaces and comfort zones. While this research draws on experiences from three very different conflict-affected contexts, as mentioned, the Central African Republic, the DRC, and South Sudan, the lessons emerging from it have much broader implications for the humanitarian sector. One of the clearest findings is the critical role of trust, partnerships, and sustained engagement, particularly with local communities and national actors, whose relationships and contextual knowledge and understanding are often central to protecting children. These lessons are more relevant than ever in today's environment, where international human rights and humanitarian law are being increasingly undermined. It has also helped inform the Alliance's emerging work on humanitarian diplomacy for child protection. They remind us that more than ever, protecting children requires building relationships, engaging diverse actors, and working collectively towards a common goal. As armed conflict and armed violence continue to affect children worldwide, we believe the lessons captured in this paper have relevance far beyond the context in which they were generated. We look forward to amplifying these findings, applying them across different settings, and using them to strengthen collaboration, partnership, and collective action towards positive outcomes for children. Thank you, and I look forward to today's rich discussion. Over to you, Sandra, I believe, or back to Katherine.
Yes, just briefly, and thank you so much, Hani, for situating us. Just to say that we're going to have a French version and a French launch of the webinar on the 2nd of July. I know you've seen this from the concept note, but just since I mentioned the interpretation today in Spanish and Arabic, just wanted to also mention we'll have a repeat, but in French, of this on July 2nd. So I think without further ado, I am going to give the floor to Sandra Magnan, who is the CAAFAG advisor at Plan International, but also co-lead of the CAAFAG task force. And more importantly today, also the author of the report, which has been co-managed as a project by UNICEF and the CAAFAG task force, and Sandra particularly as the author of the report. Sandra, over to you to walk us through the findings and the recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you, Katherine. Right. So the working paper is basically summarizing the key findings of a study on the Vancouver Principles that I conducted last year. The objective of the study was to document the collaboration between the peacekeeping mission and the child protection actors, with the aim to strengthen the prevention of child recruitment, the identification and the release of children, and the reintegration of CAAFAG. So during the study, I did 81 interviews with key informants. These interviews were conducted mainly remotely, but some of them were done in person, particularly the one in Central African Republic. So we are focusing on three countries, as Hani mentioned. So it's the DRC, South Sudan, and Central African Republic. As you can see on the graph on the right side, we had also people from at the global level. So these are positions that are more in New York, for example, or in the headquarters of various organizations, and people who had a bit of more of a global perspective on this collaboration. We interviewed a number of organizations across national NGOs, international ones, UNICEF actors mainly in those three countries, people from the peacekeeping missions, so mainly from the child protection unit, but not only. People from the community-based organizations, and also some youth who were former CAAFAG. So these are young adults who are over 18 now, but who have been CAAFAG and have gone through the whole process of reintegration. So their perspective was also very interesting to hear, like what could have been done differently. So these youth were mainly from DRC and CAR. So that's just to kind of situate a bit the study. We had also a reference group who help us to provide some guidance on the data collection mechanism and also on the review of the final report. So this working paper has 8 different sections, which are structured around the Vancouver Principles. But today, for the sake of time, I will focus only on few. So I will talk about the identification and release, the reintegration, the monitoring and reporting on grade violations, also girls, and on the planning of drawdown and transitions. So the last one is not a particular Vancouver principle, but we felt like it was important also to document what's happening when there is this drawdown and transition. And for this one, it's the experience from DRC in South Kivu. So let's start with identification and release. So in the working paper, and the working paper is now actually available on the Alliance and the CAAFAG webpage, and Kira will put the link in the chat. You will see that every section is structured around best practices, the challenges, and and some recommendations. So I will keep the same structure, but for the sake of time, I will just pick 1 or 2 of each, and I invite you to read the full report if you want to know more. So on identification and release, in terms of best practice, I wanted to speak to the collaboration between UNICEF, the peacekeeping missions, the government, NGOs, and this was mainly mentioned in the DRC, where there seems to be a lot of activities for the advocacy for the identification and release. There's a lot of work that's been done, really great collaboration also with national actors for the translation of documents in Swahili. So really interesting work that has been done on advocacy there. In terms of challenges, there is, in some countries, not everywhere, but in some countries, there is an issue with the release being linked to reintegration. So normally, if you think about the different steps, you have children that are released, which is one step, and then they can start the reintegration process. But what we've seen is that in some countries, unless there is funding for reintegration, children won't be released. And this is because the reintegration process is part of the negotiation with the armed group. So when there is a negotiation with an armed group, we will say, these children will be better off in their communities, and then they will have access to education, to livelihood. And so it's part of the negotiation. And that's why if we don't have this reintegration funds available, then it can affect the negotiation process and the credibility later on when children release and then they don't find this reintegration support. But this means that in some situations, children have been identified, verified. I know a situation in DRC where 40 children were clearly identified in an armed group, and they remained there for months until funding for reintegration was identified and secured, and then they could cover the transportation fees, which was quite significant, as you can imagine, to move 40 children from a remote place in DRC, and then to have funding to support access to education and livelihood. So that's one of the challenges, and unfortunately, although there should be 2 distinct points, it's in practice often linked. In terms of recommendation, I'd like to draw some attention to the organization of the verification missions. And here I'm talking about the verification of the presence of children in armed forces or armed groups. What we've seen is that sometimes there's been a lot of people. We don't need 20 people on a mission. We don't need 5 cars to go to a village to verify a few children. Smaller, more discreet teams with whether UNICEF or a member of the peacekeeping mission is enough. It's easier to organize, it's quicker. So I think there is a need to rethink how we can organize those verification missions. Another point is on the situation of children who spontaneously leave the armed group and then show up at the UN bases. So we have countries where children knock on the door of the UN bases and say, here we are, we've left the armed group, we want protection. But there are instances where peacekeepers didn't know how to handle those situations and didn't know what to do with the children. And so we had situations where children stayed there for weeks until the referral pathway was activated, and then they were handed over to NGOs who will then start the reintegration process. So just informing, training the peacekeepers so they know what to do when those children show up on their doors. Now on reintegration. So there are lots of very good practices, and I know I won't give justice to it, but I'd like to speak about one that I found in Central African Republic that I found very interesting. It's a national organization who's doing work with CAAFAG. Usually in the reintegration process, what we see is that we give two options to the children, whether they go back to school or they are offered some support for livelihood. As you can imagine, those children often choose livelihood because poverty is one of the driving factors that led to the recruitment in the first place. But some children could actually continue their education. The other issue with that is that when we provide education school fees, it's often for a short period of time. So the program is for 1 year, 2 years, if it's exceptional. And then, at the end of the 2 years, the funding expired and then the children are back to square one almost. In that situation, the organization is providing a small livelihood activity for the child. They receive an income. So here we're talking about having a small grocery store, selling some grocery item, making bread. One of them had a solar panel, phone charging booth, this kind of thing. And with that money, they covered their own school fees. And all the children, I thought they were no longer children, but the 18 years old youth I spoke to were all in school. They were finishing their secondary education. They had their livelihood and they were in school and they were continuing their education, which I found amazing. I could have the interview with them in French, which is quite exceptional. So I wanted to highlight this one. In terms of reintegration, one of the challenges is about the linkage in some countries between the reintegration process and the verification of the great violation of child recruitment. It's not everywhere, but there are places where a child won't start the reintegration until they're verified as per the MRM mechanism. And this can create a lot of delays. So in a situation where the NGO has short-term funding, which is quite often the case, imagine you have a 6-month, 8-month grant. The time you identify the child is verified. It can take up to 6 months in some countries. Then you can only start the reintegration program, and you have like few months left on your program to do case management, psychosocial support, life skills, livelihood. So it's all shrunk into like a very short period of time, which doesn't give the time and space for children to really go through the process. So that's really something I wanted to highlight. In terms of recommendation, there is also a need to adapt the reintegration program to the insecure environment. There are a lot of places where children go back to communities where there is still a lot of insecurity. Access is an issue, and so working with actors who are already present, putting in place a mechanism that will allow for the continuity of monitoring, even if access for the NGO is limited, is important. There are also places where giving variable items such as a sewing machine or a welding machine can expose children to risk of looting. They can be a target because in that environment, having a sewing machine is a valuable asset. So things to consider when we look at these reintegration programs. And the other point I wanted to mention is about the non-targeted approach, and that's really important. When we do reintegration program, we need to include other children who are vulnerable from the community, because if we don't do that, we risk becoming like incentivizing, basically joining an armed group to then having access to services. So this will serve to prevent child recruitment and also reduce the risk of stigmatization and retaliation when those children are perceived not only as having done bad things, but also as receiving support that is not accessible to others. So in terms of MRM, here I wanted to highlight the extensive data collection network that I found in DRC. And I found it quite impressive. This is really an extensive network that is covering the community level all the way up to the base where the data is centralized. And so community members, teachers, community leaders have been given phone credits, training on how to collect data, the criteria. And so you have all this communication tree that is coming really from the grassroots level. And then all the information is sent to focal points and all the way up. And so I know it's in theory happening everywhere, but it's not always working as well. And sometimes the quality of data is not as good. And so it seems that in DRC, they've really invested a lot at the community level, which helped to collect data in a very timely manner. We don't need to wait for months. So that's really, it helps with the speed of data collection. In terms of challenges here, I still find that the reporting on girls, I think, could benefit from more attention. We know that girls are harder to identify, harder to document. But there seems to be also a lack of understanding that girls who are married to fighters, to commanders, are also considered as CAAFAG. And a lot of people still believe that this is a situation of child marriage, this is a GBV case, and not necessarily consider them also as CAAFAG. So this is an additional vulnerability. And so I think we are lacking a lot on the documentation of those cases. The disclosure also of sexual abuse that may happen later in the case management process, whether for boys or for girls, also is rarely reported as a great violation. And if it's not disclosed on the day of the verification, then it's harder to then be documented. So in terms of recommendation, here adopting agile, flexible verification process that still respect the criteria of MRM. That's very important to guarantee the credibility of the data. But a lot of actors reported that there is a lot of bureaucracy to mobilize a verification team and field visits. So a bit of agility, flexibility will help to speed up the process so it doesn't take up to 6 months to verify cases. Another point is on streamlining the peacekeepers' reporting. The peacekeeping mission have a wide presence. It's a lot of human resources that are there on the ground that could be leveraged. We know there is a lot of high turnover, so it's hard to keep everyone updated on what is to be reported and how and to do it safely. But I think we can be creative in how we can convey the information to those peacekeepers through online learning, maybe some videos or quizzes that will help them to remind them of these great violations and how to collect data. So now I'd like to talk about girls, and girls for me is one of the key outcome of this working paper. I knew already it's hard to document them, but I think it became really clear through this working paper that there are a lot of challenges. But let me start with the best practices before I talk about the challenges. There is one I'd like to mention. It's coming from Central African Republic, and it's on prevention. And there, what they've done is, of course, they talk about the prevention of child recruitment for boys and girls into like the more child protection channels. But there, they also integrated it into GBV campaigns, which I found interesting because it's a different entry point and it's a collaboration with other actors who have a different access to girls. So among other GBV issues like child marriage and sexual violence, you have also child recruitment, which I think is a great entry point. In terms of challenges, so I've talked about the identification of girls, but then you have also the release. So even when girls are identified as CAAFAG, the release is challenging. And it's challenging because sometimes the husband, quote unquote husband, whether it's a formal or informal union, doesn't want to let the girl go. It's in South Sudan, for example, commander said, she's my property. I'd own her. She's not a CAAFAG. She's not fighting. So I won't put her on the list to be demobilized. And so it's a lot of negotiation with these commanders, with these fighters who sometimes paid for the girls or, and so they don't want to let them go. There are other situations where girls themselves don't want to leave, and particularly if they are pregnant or if they have children. And that's because they fear for, who is going to support them once they will be back in their community with a child. And that can be very challenging for them, in addition to the stigma and the community rejection. So girls are facing a lot of challenges. So in terms of recommendations here, I think it's, first of all, strengthening the capacities to identify and release those girls safely. And there are different strategies that we need to put in place. These are different than boys. The entry points are different. The safeguarding measures are different as well. And the second point is also to design gender-sensitive programs. The programs, the needs of these girls are different than for boys. So we need to cater for these needs. The girls who have children, the girls who are pregnant, the girls who need sexual and reproductive health, where they need the psychosocial support. So their needs are slightly different and we need to accommodate them. And the last point is on the planning of drawdown and transitions. So here, in terms of best practices, wanted to highlight, the planning. Of course, the more planning, the better. And so here we speak mainly about the case of DRC and the South Kivu. When you have the transition, there is a lot of activities and mandate of the peacekeeping mission that needs to transition. One of them is a negotiation with the armed group, which is one that is very challenging to hand over to. It's a set of skills. It's also a whole organization. And so in DRC, there's been some transition of this negotiation skills to national actors. And so national actors have been trained on how to negotiate with armed groups for the handover of children in a safe way, which I found, really amazing, because we are also giving this power back to the community so they know how to do this safely and they can continue the work. In terms of challenges, how you can imagine, there are a lot. So beyond the loss of secure access, the loss of all the logistic support that the peacekeeping mission provide, and particularly in contexts like DRC, where the roads are really bad, for those of you who've been there, you know what I'm talking about. And so there are places where without a four-wheel drive or without an helicopter, it's very difficult to access them. Now, beyond that, you have the handover of the child protection responsibilities, which needs to be really well planned. And so in that transition, particularly handing over all this negotiation with the armed groups at a higher level, the political level, is challenging. Challenging also is the handover of the database with all the list of focal points for all the armed groups to UNICEF, who will then take over that responsibility. But it's not just handing over a list of focal points. It's also during that transition, that introduction, you introduce the new person, the new focal point, so you can have a smooth transition. All of that can be challenging. So in terms of recommendation here, as I said, the more we anticipate, the more we have this well-planned transition, the better. And I know in DRC, there was really a lot of efforts, and communities have really appreciated all the efforts to do that transition well. It's also to continue strengthening the national capacities, because they are the one who will stay there. One thing I could have mentioned is that after the drawdown, we see sometimes armed actors or armed groups rather who feel like some level of impunity. They're like, there is no one to watch us. So now we can go back, to recruiting children. Which is not the case. Obviously, there's still people watching, and that's the community-based mechanism that will keep doing that. All right. So thank you. This was my last point. Over to you, Katherine.
Sandra, thank you so much for condensing the richness of the outcome and really encouraging everybody to take a look at the paper, because there is a lot more than what you were able to share in this short time. But thank you for really walking us through the different the selected topics that we felt were important for this conversation today. I think I will give the floor now to Valentina Falco, who's the team leader for the child protection team in the Department of Peace Operations in the UN. Valentina, thank you for joining us, and please, over to you for your reflections on the paper. Thanks.
Thank you, Katherine, and good morning to all the colleagues, delegates, partners, and friends who are joining us today. It is an absolute privilege to have the opportunity to be part of this conversation. Katherine, when you approached me to ask me if the UN Department of Peace Operations would be willing to join this conversation, you did so fearing we may take issues with the recommendations contained in the working paper. Quite the contrary. What we saw going through this excellent and comprehensive piece of research, to which, as Sandra mentioned, 3 of our child protection teams from MONUSCO, MINUSCA, and UNMISS have contributed as informants, is a testament to the results that UNICEF, child protection teams in UN Peacekeeping, and the national child protection actors have jointly achieved since UN Security Council Resolution 1379, first mainstream child protection into peacekeeping 25 years ago, this coming November. The relationship between peacekeeping operations, UNICEF, and child protection actors goes way beyond the remit of collaboration. Our child protection teams in peacekeeping and UNICEF are the 2 inextricably linked pillars, and Sandra has very well explained that dynamic. Pillars upon which the sophisticated normative and institutional architecture of the monitoring and reporting mechanism and of the children and armed conflict agenda as a whole has rested since the adoption of Resolution 1612 back in 2005. And ever since, the coordination between UN peacekeepers, UNICEF, and the national child protection actors has led to the release and reintegration of thousands of children, saved countless lives, and contributed to healing physical and psychological wounds, and prevented many more from being caused. It is not by accident that the recent consultations here at UN headquarters on the delegation of programmatic activities in peace operations identified child protection in US peacekeeping as a best practice in coordination and lack of duplication between UN peace operations and UN agencies, funds, and programs, and identified very little room for further delegation of programmatic tasks. This is not the time for complacency, though, especially since there is no denying that child protection in UN peacekeeping currently faces unprecedented struggle for survival. The paper aptly identifies some of the challenges that child protection mandate in peace operation has been facing. And Sandra, you have also summarized a few, from a drastic reduction of personnel and resources to the lack of strategic vision sometimes in leveraging child protection as a tool for political engagement with parties to the conflict, to the, at times, and Sandra, you have just mentioned, hasty peacekeeping drawdowns and transitions, leaving dangerous gaps in child protection systems on the ground. What we are facing is a crisis of political support and commitment to the very notion that child protection should be a core duty of peacekeeping, that it should be a core duty of peacekeeping to protect children in conflict zones. The growing struggle to preserve even basic child protection language in peacekeeping mandates, as we have witnessed a few weeks ago during the negotiation of UNMISS new mandate, to factor the protection of girls and boys in both strategic and operational planning at mission level, and to secure the very basic resources for child protection teams in UN peacekeeping missions to continue performing their core tasks, stem from the increasing neglect of child protection as a core UN peacekeeping responsibility, and one to which the United Nations, its bodies, and its member states should commit to, perform, and be accountable for. Our child protection work, along with UNICEF, our capacity to coordinate and deliver, are only as strong as the mandate entrusted upon us by the Security Council and the resources allocated to child protection components by the UN budgetary bodies. Our action in preventing and curbing the recruitment abuse of children by parties to the conflict is only as effective as the mainstreaming of child protection across all mission components, including through training, and Sandra just highlighted that, and areas of mandate implementation. And as the mission's leadership's understanding that child protection should be a key tool to achieve the mission's own political goals and protection strategies. And finally, our voice as child protection officers in peacekeeping settings is only as loud vis-a-vis parties to the conflict and national counterparts, insofar as it is amplified by member states, UN leadership, both at headquarters and the mission level, donors and champions. And in this respect, I would like to close my remarks by recalling, if you allow me, the genesis of this working paper, as well as much of the work that we as Child Protection Team in the UN Department of Peace Operations have carried out around the Vancouver Principles since 2021. For a moment, let's think back to a time and the world in which one member state of the United Nations, Canada, would take upon itself the political and diplomatic initiative of reaffirming the key principles of child protection in peacekeeping and their impact on the protection of children in the direst conflict settings. A time in the world in which said member state would reach out to child protection actors, national, international, governmental, UNICEF, DPO, asking for their ideas and proposals to strengthen the dissemination of those principles. A time and a world in which child protection actors, for once, could move beyond the usual struggle for survival and benefit from the resources to reflect and undertake cutting-edge research, as this working paper, on how to improve the protection of children in armed conflict, be at the forefront of the debate on the future of protection in peacekeeping, and put forward solutions to strengthen the specific role of child protection in implementing sensitive Security Council mandates. Global Affairs Canada, Ed and colleagues, I take this opportunity to thank you for your commitment and farsightedness back then through the adoption of the Vancouver Principles, without which we wouldn't be here today. And may your courage and dedication to the cause of children and US peacekeeping be an inspiration to more state parties in these challenging times, to lend their voice to this mandate and spearhead renewed political commitment to the critical work of UN peacekeepers and UNICEF in protecting the lives and future of children in conflict zones. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Valentina, also for this call to action and to renew our collective commitment and mobilization of political will and, of course, resources, but to have us all move in the same direction together with the many partners on the ground, national and international. So really appreciating your reflections and also the opportunity that and the way you've looked at the recommendations. Really, your colleagues on the ground have greatly supported the research. They have engaged with us and with Sandra in particular while preparing this document. So just acknowledging that, you know, having others from the outside looking at what we do is never easy. And so just a word of thanks for that. We're now moving into the Q&A segment, and I see there is 4 questions in the Q&A button. So encouraging you to pose your questions there. If we don't get to all of them today, we're gonna continue the conversation in any case in the community of practice. But what I'd like to do is I'm gonna maybe group them a little bit and maybe ask Sandra to come in first, and then Valentina, I think there is one question at least that I would like you to try to give an answer. And so maybe Sandra, let me just ask you first. There was a question in relation how you would describe the national frameworks for reintegration in the different countries where the research was done. I think the question came when you were talking about best practices, particularly in Central African Republic, providing children with both education and livelihood opportunities following the release. And then I think the other question that perhaps is for you is Ross is asking how he'd like to understand what was the main challenge working with children with specific needs, and whether you were able to you know, assess their needs and the challenges in the reintegration process. So maybe I'll start with this too, and then Valentina, I'll let you read the questions in the chat for you, and then we can read them out loud after, if that is okay. Sandra, over to you.
Okay, thank you. So for the reintegration framework, actually in Central African Republic, they're just starting now to really put together this reintegration strategy with the government. So I think this was more of an initiative of this national organization, and I'm sure there are many more that I didn't see, but I thought this one was interesting because one of the main challenge is the sustainability, the long-term impact of these programs. Quite often, and it's one of the big challenge of reintegration is that the programs, the funding is too short. So within 8 months, less than a year is extremely difficult to support these children who have gone through so much. It's also being really holistic in the terms of the services that are provided. So it's mental health and psychosocial support, it's livelihood, it's education, it's sometimes access to justice and legal aid, it's access to documentation. So it's really comprehensive, and it's not something that can happen in a couple of months. So the more time we have, the better. That's the first thing. The second thing is also the cross-sectoral work. Child protection actors don't need to do everything alone. There are other actors out there who can help us. The education sector can help us. Health, MHPSS, the food security and livelihood. All of these actors, we all need to join hands to support the reintegration of these children. And then the other point I'd like to make is also when there is a strong political will, it works best. It works better. And that's, for example, in DRC. It's maybe not the perfect reintegration program, but at least there is a strong commitment from the government. And that's really important because if you leave it to NGOs to do everything on their own, then you have a lot of differences. When it's coordinated and led by the government, there is ownership, there is, you know, a strategy and guidance, and I think that's also really helpful. So that's what I can say to the first question. For the second one, the specific needs, it's actually a point that is in the report. You will find it. There is not a dedicated section to it, but it's mentioned, I believe, in the reintegration part. It is challenging. So when you have children who have disabilities, who have impairments due to their period of recruitment, when they live in remote places where it's sometimes very difficult to have access to any services, and it doesn't need to be like something very big. There is also the issue of just identifying impairments. For example, children who have lost hearing, then it's really hard to see it. And then unless children communicate, unless you screen and you ask the right question, you can completely miss on those children who have lost hearing because a bomb exploded next to them. And so, first of all, the screening is important, and then second is the provision of services. When it comes to children also who have specific needs related to MHPSS, for example, there is also a big lack of support in some places. Children with addictions. So yeah, there are many challenges, unfortunately.
Thank you very much, Sandra. There is many more questions coming in, I think, for you, but let me turn to Valentina for a moment, and then if we have another minute at the very end, before the closing remarks, we'll come back to you. Valentina, so there was a couple of questions in the chat in relation to the role of peacekeeping, but also the collaboration with and the NGO community, particularly, for instance, in terms of training the peacekeepers. So maybe a word on that. There is some learning, including on training the British Ministry of Defence. That was one thing. And then another question in relation to, again, the collaboration, engaging with local actors in the peacekeeping, when there is a peacekeeping mission. And then how the collaboration between UN peacekeeping missions and child protection actors be improved. I think the paper does speak to it, so please, I encourage you to go back to it, but maybe you know, what were the main challenges in protecting children affected by armed conflict, and then how effective current coordination mechanism, CAR, South Sudan, and the DRC. All of this, you'll find the reflections and the findings in the paper, but maybe, Valentina, a few thoughts from your side. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Katherine. So I'll start with training, and I would like to encourage everyone to take a look at UN Peacekeeping Resource Hub. Over the years, the Department of Peace Operations has developed a number of training packages on child protection, both for peacekeeping uniform personnel and for civilian personnel in UN peacekeeping. So I encourage you to take a look. It's quite interesting and can be also used and customized, just looking at Katie's question, to inform, you know, child protection at the local level or at the national level. The packages are also used by national peacekeeping training centers. So please feel free to take a look at those resources, which we also use to deliver pre-deployment training to uniform peacekeeping personnel. We have specialized training for the military, for UN military, specialized training for the police, and we target in particular those military officers who are supposed to be deployed as child protection focal points for the military and the police. And this is something Sandra was hinting at. Of course, we have teams of civilian child protection officers on the ground, but it's also the uniform component. It's really one of the assets of peacekeeping that we rely on UN military and UN police to serve as our eyes and ears on the ground. And this is also linked to what we do to prevent recruitment and use of children. Imagine, you know, patrolling by UN military and UN police in very remote areas, sometimes under armed groups' control. And this is what our teams are trained to do, to recognize early signs of recruitment and use. For instance, when you see armed groups or military personnel around schools and so on. So we rely extensively on our uniform colleagues to take preventive child protection action. I hope this links a bit the two topics, Katherine.
Perfect. No, thank you so much, Valentina. and thank you for referring us to the available resources, and perhaps we'll find a way to put them in the recording or in the community of practice global platforms. I think we have still a couple of minutes. So Sandra, maybe if I can turn back to you, there is a couple more questions in the chat that if you want to share some reflections based on the research. There is a lot of appreciation for your focus on girls and how challenging it is to reaching them, and also a question is about what can governments do better from the assessment and the research to reach girls, but also how can they be mainstream in child protection programming in conflict settings and strengthen also the accountability for reaching them. And the other question I wanted to flag is, so the paper focuses on both programmatic gaps and operational gaps. I think it goes a little bit beyond that, Wei Yui, if I'm pronouncing your name correctly. It also looks at the coordination, and so really encouraging you to take a look at it. But another question is related to the collaboration between the security sector, institutions, and the community stakeholders and community civil society organizations, and how can that be strengthened to ensure effective and sustainable prevention of recruitment and use of children. So if you can say a few words to that, Sandra, that would be great. And then we'll proceed to closing. Thank you. Over to you.
Thanks. Yes, for the girls, well, that's really almost close to my heart, because really I've learned so much for this research about their situation and the challenges that we are facing. I think what can be done, well, first of all, is that the strategies to identify boys are not necessarily the same as to identify girls. So we can't just go into an group, camp and say, just look around and pick up the girls like this. They are often hidden. They are in the kitchen. They are in the tent. So it's a lot more difficult to find them during monitoring visits. They are all sometimes hidden purposely as well. And so children have told us that they knew there was a verification mission coming. They've been purposely hidden somewhere else. And then and so then they escaped and then share that with the NGOs, for instance. So what can be done? I think we need to understand how to identify those girls safely from a different entry point. What are the other actors? What are the women's association? What are the service providers for sexual and reproductive health, for example? Who can be different entry points to identify those girls? So we can explain them their rights. We can tell them you have the right to leave if you want to, and that's really a survivor-centered approach. So the idea is not to force anyone, but to give them all the information that they need to then take an informed decision and say, okay, whether I want to leave because this is unbearable and I know I will have access to this and this services, or I prefer to stay because they believe this is in their best interest. But at least, we have like a different entry point to give them the information, and then they take that decision. I think that's important. And then every country may be different. The entry points are not the same everywhere, to make sure we do it safely and we don't expose girls to further harms. The other thing is having more women within those monitoring visits. The girls I talked to all say the same thing. They said, we want to talk to women. We don't feel comfortable talking about what happened to us to a man. And that's, I think, also important to have at least one woman in each of these verification missions who can handle the cases of girls. So to the second question on the collaboration between the different actors, I think we have to admit as child protection actors, there is a bit of discomfort to interact with security sector. It's not something we're very comfortable doing. I think there is a lot of fear of losing our neutrality, losing how we will be perceived by the community. So particularly at the international organizations. National organizations are a bit more flexible. I have the feeling like they they know their environment a lot better, and I think there is a bit more flexibility. But ultimately, I think we need to work more together. We all have a role to play. We all have different perspectives, and there are middle grounds where in the end, we all want the same thing. We may have, different way of looking at things, but ultimately the goal is the same. So to look at each other's perspective, understand each other, and acknowledge, the differences, find those common grounds so that we can work better together. And I think for that, we need to have a space, like a safe space for all of us to be around the table and talk to each other, so that we can find these common strategies, coordinate all actions, so we can achieve the same goal.
Great. Thank you very much, Sandra. So there is a few more questions unanswered in the Q&A, but we'll come to them in different formats, including on sharing, what next after this research. There is quite a few findings, and so we'll find opportunities to take that forward. I think we're now coming to the end of the webinar. Ed, I'd like to give you the floor. Ed Wright-Howell is a senior analyst with the Permanent Mission of Canada. And with a huge thanks for supporting this research. We have found it very interesting and indeed wanting to take it forward in different ways. So Ed, over to you, please. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Katherine, and I'm really glad to represent Canada in this meeting, as you mentioned, as a member of the Permanent Mission over in New York. I wanted to thank you, the Alliance, and UNICEF for convening this event, and a massive thanks to Sandra for the excellent work in the working paper. The agenda, the whole Children Armed Conflict agenda, and the people who work in it are under huge pressure right now, and I'm sure you're feeling that on the ground, and it's very, very visible to us. And as I followed the presentation today, I really reflected that pressure that we feel here to simplify mandates for peacekeeping missions, to cut budgets, the kind of idea that there might be some easier way out of conflict. It ignores the immense dedication of colleagues on the ground and the years of sustained effort that have gone into understanding the needs of children and responding to them. And it's a small part that Canada plays, including here in New York through its group of friends of children on conflict, is try to give the diplomats that make choices about UN mandates some insight into what goes into understanding the complex needs of children affected by conflict and what goes into supporting them. As I watched the presentation, there were a couple of key messages that really resonated with me from Sandra and then the discussion afterwards, and I wanted to pick a couple of those out. I mean, the first one is the critical nature of partnerships, and the research in all of the conflict-affected locations that Sandra covered really highlighted that child protection is only delivered when peacekeeping missions are working together with UN agencies, civil society organizations, and local community toward that one common goal. And as was really brought out in the discussion, the political will of governments is really important too. Each of those actors brings a really unique and valuable expertise and perspective to that effort. And I really want to take the chance now to say thank you. I recognize some friendly faces and some people I've worked quite a bit with on this agenda who've joined the meeting today, but there are many that I don't recognize, and I could see in the chat that people are engaged from all over the world. So thanks to you at all. It may not feel like it, but I think that effort is recognized and appreciated from New York here at the center of the kind of mandate discussions. It's really more important than ever that we find ways to work together, to use the limited resources that we have and the shrinking resources that we have, and to really plan cooperation right into the heart of the activities that we do to protect children rather than being reactive. I wanted to pull out a thing that I think we see as a challenge here that Sandra emphasized, and that's prevention. We can see as we come under pressure to find sort of budget reductions that investing in protection is clearly the most effective and sustainable way to prevent children from the harms of conflict, but it's also difficult to keep prioritizing when budgets are shrinking and immediate life-saving need increases. So I'm grateful to Sandra for bringing that out very strongly. I was struck again. I mean, this whole discussion is of course coloured by the challenges of resources and budgets, but it really came out very strongly the challenges of the release and integration process, that if you don't have money at that critical moment to move the children on, to find them somewhere, then the whole process of mediation, of negotiation, of building that future falls apart. And that's something that I heard very clearly today. I really valued Sandra highlighting the complex gendered aspects of reintegration and the different needs of boys and girls associated with armed forces and groups, and recognizing the different needs of boys and girls is yet another thing that's coming under pressure in some contexts here in the UN discussions at the moment. But of course, for Canada, gender equality is at the heart of our whole approach to supporting peacekeeping operations, from sort of engaging in mandate discussions right through to supporting equality and participation in peacekeeping. I think it's always going to be the case that local actors and community-based organizations are going to remain at the center of prevention, release, reintegration, and protection efforts. And they're also, of course, essential to effectiveness of monitoring and reporting mechanisms coverage. So that local community level leadership and engagement, we recognize that as being critical, and we thank those who are a part of that. And overall, Canada is really proud to have supported this work through our long-standing engagement on the Vancouver Principles. Launched around about almost a decade ago now. We still think that framework is a really useful and relevant way to guide states in supporting child protection efforts, particularly through peacekeeping. And as we take the chance to highlight the 2019 implementation guide that we drafted as something that's really concrete and useful if you are engaging with peacekeeping missions or national authorities or any other sort of security institution that is seeking to strengthen child protection. Overall, though, as we heard, I think, from all the participants, our shared goal remains the same. We're still just as strongly committed to preventing the recruitment of use of children by armed forces and groups everywhere, and we're committed to ensuring that all children are able to live lives free of violence. So thanks to Sandra, Valentina, Katherine, and to you all. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Ed. And I think I just want to echo the thank you to all the colleagues on the ground and the national organizations that have joined us today, and for the collaboration, and really we see this moment as a way to amplify that work, but also take it forward and strengthen the collaboration that both Valentina and Sandra spoke to. I think this brings us to the end of our webinar. I'd like to invite you just to do a quick, there will be a link appearing on your screen to do a quick evaluation to give us some feedback on the webinar. We hope you found it useful. As I said, we'll continue answering some of the questions that we didn't get to today in the chat. So we'll, with this, I just want to thank really everybody for your time today and your participation, and look forward to staying in touch. Thanks a lot.